All right, so now you don't have to pay attention to the news to have heard about this one. Social media erupted recently when CNN broke a story about allegedly slave auctions taking place in Libya involving migrants. Here to break down the facts, Pan-Africanist Miguel Lorne, and on the phone, chairperson of the Black Consciousness Movement, Mr. Gerald Pereira from Guyana. Mr. Pereira, can you hear us, sir? Good morning.
Yes, I can. Good morning to you.
Good morning. You're speaking with Neville and Empress.
Good morning.
Yes.
And Mr.
Greetings to you all.
Mr. Lorne is also here.
Blessings.
Yes.
Miguel, let me start with you. Is this something new that's happening, or is it just because CNN came out with this expose where we are hearing about this now?
No, it's not.
Okay, first of all, what I would like to say, you know, I've been an activist for many years, and I've worked with Kwame Ture. I lived in Libya, and I know the Libyan revolution and what took place. This is something new. This is something new. This is a new development in Libya. What I find interesting, and this is very important. You see, CNN definitely has an agenda. There is something sinister here. My position, our position is, yes, this is taking place. It is happening. But in 2011, when the Western powers led by France and the CNN, who were the cheerleaders, were spreading the fake news. I mean, Donald Trump is now talking about fake news. But we who have been activists in the global south, those of us who have stood up to the lies coming out of the empire, we knew about fake news for decades. We know about false narratives and his silencing of history and what have you. We are aware of this, but now this is coming now to the forefront. CNN was one of the cheerleaders when black Libyans, loyalist forces, black Libyans who were supporters of Gaddafi and the Libyan revolution were standing up to defend the Libyan nation against the Western countries that backed the Al-Qaeda rebels of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Force, who were Arab supremacists and who were opposed to Gaddafi's Pan-African project. France and all of these countries aided these people to overthrow the Libyan Jamahiriya. And the so-called rebels were saying that the Libyans, black Libyans and sub-Saharan Africans who were living in Libya for decades, they were being referred to as sub-Saharan mercenaries. And the CNN was pushing that line. So the CNN and the BBC and all of these, especially the CNN and Fox News, they prepared the frame, the groundwork for this. When the so-called rebels started lynching black Africans and lynching black Libyans, it was going on. You know, there are many black Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, and black Libyans loyalists who are loyal to Gaddafi who are in prison. CNN isn't covering that.
All right.
So there is something here in the agenda.
Okay, let me get a comment from Mr. Lorne before Empress comes in.
Right. Upon destroying the Libyan state, because Gaddafi was definitely moving towards Africanizing Libya.
Correct.
He participated in the African Union with great strength in many, many ways, economically, you know, financially and otherwise.
That's right.
He was supporting repatriation and the resettlement of people, even from the West. Black people who wanted to go home. At the African Union, himself and President Wade carried that line very strongly.
Correct.
So this movement now from Libya going over into Greece and Italy and so would never have taken place. A lot of Africans from bordering countries like Niger, Chad, Sudan, and other countries as far as Djibouti, Eritrea, went over to Libya, but they lived in Libya. And he encouraged the intermingling, he encouraged the migration, so it was a south-to-south migration, and he encouraged intermarriage and so on. And once you got married and so on, the state provided you with certain basics for children, for education and so on.
That's right, brother.
So they realized now they had to destroy the Libyan state. You virtually have 3 governments in Libya now. You have a government over in Benghazi in the east. You have a government over in Tripoli, the western part of Libya. And then in between that now is ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and everybody else. So you destroy the state, and therefore this free-for-all now exists, and the boat people now comes in, the traders and everybody comes in now, and realize that this being one of the nearest points to Europe, that they can take people across in overcrowded, disheveled boats, whereby you're almost certain that 1/3 of who you start out with is going to die, including children. And so we have this thing developed that level. So you actually have camps now in Libya, these so-called migrant camps. And from these camps now become feeder ground for the traders to make huge profits in going across. And Europe must be blamed also, because they are encouraging it. Because when you send out policies that, yes, like what Germany did, we can take 1 million migrants, because their population control over the years, they realize they don't have the household helpers, the street cleaners, you know, they are now short of a laboring force. So they encourage it quietly.
Let me, that is such an important point. It's giving me goosebumps, because we just played on the screen some images, and there are very few people that are outraged on social media about this. But people are saying, when they bombed France, we said pray for France, and every black person had the French flag up on their social media, and now that this is happening, nobody's talking about that. Let me ask you, Mr. Pereira, you lived in Libya, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And is that the time of Gaddafi or after?
What is happening now?
No, when you were in Libya, is that the time when Gaddafi was there or after?
No, I lived during during Gaddafi under the Libyan Jamahiri. That could never have happened in Libya. That was not tolerated. Racism was not Africans in Gaddafi's. If you look at Gaddafi's security detail, 75 to 80% of it consisted of black Libyans, including the head for the female security arm of his security detail, who's a black woman. You can check these things. They're there. You can Google them. You can see pictures of them. Those women from the security detail, they were raped. Apart from the way they killed Gaddafi, those women were raped by NATO's so-called rebels. And these people were supported by the Qataris and the Saudis. And we know, if you know the way Saudi Arabia and Qatar treat their non-residents, it's not far off from forms of slavery, but that is not spoken of. CNN doesn't hit that, because Qatar and Saudi Arabia, the ruling elites in those countries, are allies of the Western powers of NATO, the United States,
you know,
and Britain. But what I'm saying is, the thing is, what did CNN report when the town of Tawarga, that had about a population of 250,000 black Libyans, who stood up for Gaddafi and the Libyan Jamahiri, were ethnically cleansed by NATO's back rebels. CNN didn't cover that.
You know,
Gaddafi loyalists, black, if you were, when the rebels seized certain areas, the rebels were only able to seize areas with the help of NATO. The rebels were never the so-called rebels were never in a position to win a battle. When they took control of areas, once your skin was black, you could have been a black Libyan or a sub-Saharan African, so-called sub-Saharan African residing in Libya. You were deemed a Gaddafi loyalist and tortured or lynched. This is facts, and CNN wasn't giving coverage to this. We were talking about it.
Mr. Pereira, I completely, I mean, as a Pan-Africanist, I'm with you, and there are a lot of stories which we're not telling, and we need more time to tell these stories. But when we started, I want to ask you both, just to make sure that it never happens again, because we can see the economic slavery already with our people of African Negro descent through colonization. I need you both to help us to understand, if it is happening, who you think is happening, who's doing it, and what do we do to end this modern day slavery so we never end up in the situation again? What do we need to do?
We have to make sure, yes, we have to put an end to this and to make sure that this doesn't happen. But definitely, these are people, the people who are carrying out these acts are gangs. These would be gangs that have links. These gangs, the people, these traders, would be people with links to some of these gangs that are have little control of pockets of Libya. Because as the brother pointed out earlier, there's no centralized, Libya's broken up into 3 different governments, and then you have militias that are doing their own thing. The point is, though, what we must also take into account is, and you know, you got to be very careful with the French, because you see, Kwame Toure said something, you know, and I say it without apologies. The European powers, the Western powers do not lie sometimes, they lie all the time. And we have to be very careful about the way they present their narrative. For example, let me tell you something, just nearby in Mauritania. Mauritania legally abolished slavery only in 1981. And they made it a crime in 2007, right? And yet there has only been 1 conviction for a slave master. And Mauritania turned around and jailed in August 2016. Mauritania sentenced 15 anti-slavery activists, right? Sorry, 13 anti-slavery activists to 15 years in prison for an alleged role in a riot. And they're members of the Resurgence for the Abolitionist Movement.
Mr. Pereira, I have to jump in, sir, because we have to go. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, sir.
Okay,
thanks a lot. Miguel, to respond to...
Right, in terms of what Empress has said about stopping it, I'm glad the Libya thing is now being highlighted, because what is happening beside Libya isn't far from the reality of what is going on, because like he mentioned, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and those regions, they treat black people like slaves. They have been... You might have the auction. What makes the Libya thing so graphic is that you actually see the auction. 10,000 dinars, 5,000, 6,000, that really look graphic. But how Saudi Arabia and these other Arabic countries have been exploiting the poverty of our people in Africa and bringing our people across, especially our sisters, our young girls and so, and treat them as what they call sex slaves virtually. So the matter of Libya came before the Security Council brought by France, the Security Council of the United Nations yesterday. And they said they're going to deal with it. But you can't just stop at Libya. You've got to deal with the broad cross-section of North Africa, from Egypt, from even Ethiopia, from Eritrea, that are going across because of poverty to get work and are virtually treated worse than ordinary human beings. So we really want the thing to highlight it. So that's it. But you see, you come back to your black countries now. Our leaders in Africa have siphoned off the wealth and the resources of Africa, that quite a lot of our countries now are so depleted. Yeah. We have to and lead to this type of thing.
We have to follow it up.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Because even human trafficking in our own country here now, girls being trafficked across, you know, it's so much to deal with. All right,
chairperson of the Black Consciousness Movement, you heard him on the phone, Mr. Gerald Pereira from Guyana, and Pan-Africanist. I'm a good friend, Miguel Lauren. Good to see you.
I feel like I want to just go up on the battlefield and just...
Yes,
you understand? I feel like I'm just like...
You feel like take up your arms.
But we're going to have to switch lanes. We're going to...
And Carol Neville with you when you take up your arms.
Yeah, man, I'm ready. I'm up on front line.
Oh, me up on the front line.
Oh, to my brothers and sisters. Yes, he must. We're going to switch lanes, however, but don't ever stop the fight after this show. But during this show, we're going to switch lanes to fashion and technology after this break. We have work to do.
So cool.